Before we jump into this podcast, let's just have a first word from our sponsors, NordVPN, the fastest VPN in the world and an absolute essential travelling companion. You can use NordVPN on 10 devices with just one account, easily switching your virtual location to access apps and websites in other countries. But if you're out of the country, make sure that you've got NordVPN to be able to use your subscriptions and watch the live sport that you might miss. If you're at home, use it to see if you can save money with products that might be cheaper in another region. Go to nordvpn.com/Manchester to get 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. The link is also in the podcast description. Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. This is the Midweek Debate. We're back again. My name is Stephen Railston and I'm joined by Tyrone Marshall. This is the 3rd episode of the Midweek Debate. Ty, can you believe they've allowed us to record 3 of these? We've not been killed off yet and the podcast scrapped.
It's amazing we've not been taken off air, to be honest, Stephen. And I'm getting right into the spirit of things, to be honest. I'm finding it easier and easier to disagree with you every week. So yeah, I feel like we're really hitting our stride now.
It's what usually happens, to be fair. Maybe we could start looking at merchandise soon as well. Some T-shirts and some mugs, maybe, I was thinking. Maybe some a snapback as well.
I think it's a matter of time, mate. Yeah, merchandise. We'll sell it at the live shows. $5 an autograph. I think we're...
it's an exciting future. It's a very exciting future to look at.
The future is podcasts rather than the written word, I think it's fair to say.
Do United have an exciting future, Ty? Because on this episode, we're going to look at, in the first part, I've explained a few times for those who haven't listened to the Midweek Debate, we do focus in on a subject in the first part of the podcast. So me and Ty have agreed to look back at Sir Jim Ratcliffe's first year at the helm at Old Trafford. It's the 1-year anniversary of him officially acquiring a minority stake tomorrow. So we're recording this on Wednesday. It was the 25th February 2024. And we're going to look back at just the last 12 months, really, discuss what he's done right, if he's done anything right, what he's done wrong. Because in the last few months, Ty, his popularity has plummeted.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say it's been a pretty disastrous year. I'm just writing a piece on it for tomorrow morning and was looking back at the round table he did at Ineos' Knightsbridge offices a year ago, and I think the first question was about why now, and he said it's been. I think he used the words completely miserable to describe the last 11 years, and it feels like a pretty apt description to describe the last 12 months. I mean, you look at United, and the whole thing just feels utterly miserable. The staff are miserable, the manager is miserable, the fans are miserable. And it's been a wretched year, isn't it? Imagine telling Ratcliffe a year ago that within the space of 12 months there'd be protests and it'd be labelled in song alongside the Glazers. It's hard to believe, really, but it's just been.
And it was so positive then, wasn't it? When you think about that chat and those articles that were coming out, and the quotes he was producing were decent. It got the fans on side. It was Trawlers Limited, wasn't it? His company was called, which was obviously a nod to Eric Cantona. Everything just seemed right. There was obviously protracted negotiations between Ratcliffe and the Glazers over how the deal was going to get done. And Qatar were involved, but were Qatar really ever at the table? The fake sheikh. So it seemed it was better to have Ratcliffe involved than no one at all. And it seemed like there was going to be a more brighter future at Old Trafford. But as you say, it is miserable, isn't it? We can all feel it at the moment.
Yeah, you really can. It is just a grim football club at the moment. Nothing goes right. It feels like, and we were having this. I was on the train back with Samuel and Rich Fay, formerly of this parish, on Sunday, and I think while we were on the train, Anthony scored that great goal for Real Betis, and it was just sums this club up.
Couldn't believe that.
It's a modern. It was a great goal. Yeah, it's a modern social media phrase, isn't it? Like the banter era. This club's banter era. Like Manchester United's banter era has been going on for 12 years now, and just shows no signs of stopping. It is beyond belief, and you're right. It was positive a year ago, but let's be honest. Talking's the easy bit, isn't it? I could have sat there. Yeah. I could have bought 25% of the club, apart from the fact I don't have 1.25 billion spare. But other than that, I could have done that. I could have sat in my offices and said really good things, and everyone would have been like, "This is going to be great." It's the actions that count, and the actions have been disastrous. Really, I mean, you said. You kind of mentioned before what's gone right, what's gone wrong. The only thing that I can think is positive is that they've at least tried to do something about Old Trafford and maybe the training ground. Beyond that, I can't think of anything, to be honest.
Yeah, That is the only positive thing. And yet
Yeah.
we still don't have kind of a clear indication. I mean, the presumption is they are going to build a new stadium. They are going to push ahead with that. That is Ratcliffe's preference. And if that's what he wants, you'd imagine he's going to get it. You're right. They've invested 50 million into Carrington as well to make necessary improvements. But me and Sammy were laughing last week. I think someone from the club said to him, it's typical United. Built a new overflow car park, and even that isn't big enough. When we drive into the training ground, we get put in there, and even that fills up with spaces. Sometimes they just feel like they can't do anything right, which is a real big shame. And Ratcliffe coming on board had the potential to change that, and it hasn't. We'll have to go back to the build up to Wembley with Eric Ten Hag if we're going to talk about this and kind of analyse Ratcliffe's time. We can't ignore that. It's probably a timely point to discuss it as well, because obviously Raphael Varane, quotes from himself, have come out today talking about his relationship with Ten Hag and how he thought it was a bit fractured and he kind of lost the connection in the dressing room. We could all see in the build up to that game he needed to be sacked, except everyone in that boardroom who's paid handsomely to make those decisions. And that was the first massive blot on Ineos' copybook, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. And there's kind of two strands to this. There's the football decisions they've got wrong, which we're going to touch on now, Ten Hag and Ashworth. And there's the kind of penny pinching cuts that have just destroyed morale at the club, which may or may not be necessary, but they seem like a drop in the ocean compared to the bigger issue around the debt, of which, it's the Glazers' debt, to be fair, and that has long been a problem. It's ticked over £1 billion now in interest repayments. But to focus on the football decisions, like you said, and you said then that nobody could see it in the boardroom. They could see it. That's the problem. They could see it. They had decided to sack him. There's no ifs or buts about it. He was gone. And then they won the cup final and he wasn't gone. And it just kind of, my worry on the football side, and then fundamentally it's going to be the football side that is what Ineos are judged in. If they somehow won the Premier League next season and they've made 400 staff redundant, then, I don't want to say nobody's going to care. People are obviously going to care, but it's going to be forgotten about. If United win the league in the next few years, those redundancies are going to be forgotten about. It's just the reality of it. It's the football side that will be judged on it. And the worry is that they just can't, they're not making sensible decisions on the football side of it. You're right that everyone could see Ten Hag era had run its course. And I think Ineos could see it as well. But they prevaricated when he won the cup and they changed their mind and they gave him a new contract and none of it made sense. The Dan Ashworth thing we'll come on to is just utter
Do you not
madness.
think the Ten Hag decision set the tone for what we've seen in the last 12 months? When you botch such an important decision, that was the biggest decision they had on their hands, and they absolutely messed it up. And I feel like it's just set the tone for the rest of their Premiership in charge so far.
Yeah, it has. It's blundering. It's not been able to make a firm decision, and none of it really makes any sense because maybe they sounded him out without us knowing, but in that period where they were considering sacking Ten Hag, they spoke. Everyone knows he spoke to other managers. We've reported who they spoke to. It was never mentioned about Ruben Amorim, and I think if they'd spoken to him, it would have been, because let's be honest, he was so desperate to get out of Portugal. We tried to get the West Ham job, which thankfully
that is desperation.
Get. But it kind of sums up that United then went to Amorim a few months later when he hadn't seemingly been on that list in the summer. And I'm not saying he's the wrong person at all. I like the guy a lot, and I really hope he is successful. But it kind of sums up where United were, that there doesn't seem to be any clear kind of leadership on the football side here. And the Ten Hag thing, and you look at, a year ago, Ratcliffe was saying the mistake this club has made is basically giving managers all the power. And they wanted to change that. But now they've kind of gone back to that kind of thing. It's, he was on about sporting director dictating the style of play, which what you get, but that's not what's happening now. And maybe it won't matter when maybe they get the right players, it'll be fine. But it does kind of sum it up that the Ten Hag decision, the uncertainty, the changing of the mind there. And, I said last week in copy, he was a lame duck manager, and I went down badly with at least one fan who emailed me. But essentially, he was a lame duck because everyone knew they'd come so close to sacking him. There was no way he could really recover from that, even though he stayed, because as Varane touched on, the dynamics in the dressing room had changed already. When you get that close to the sack and then survive, the players know you're on borrowed time. So yeah, it was a decision that kind of made you worry about the direction of travel here.
It's all well and good saying Ratcliffe saying, well, look, we've given managers too much power. But then in that transfer window, after extending Ten Hag's contract, they still signed players that they would have signed in previous summers. It was still a very Ten Hag-esque transfer window, wasn't it? It just contradicted the words that had come out of his mouth a few weeks or a few months earlier. Look, Dan Ashworth came on board. We've covered that when he was sacked in December. 5 months at the club. I think it was 159 days. It was kind of put to us, wasn't it? It was too many cooks in the kitchen. But on paper, that looked like it could have worked. It looked like a good lineup of experienced minds in the boardroom. You had Jason Wilcox as technical director, Omar Barada as CEO, and Ashworth as sporting director. On paper, that should have worked, and it hasn't. And we've been screaming out, haven't we, over the last, 10 years, saying United need to have a hierarchy. They need these people in these positions. And they've even messed that up. Now they've finally got it.
Yeah, they have. I mean, Ratcliffe said before Ashworth officially started, he was one of the best sporting directors in the world. He's one of the richest sporting directors in the world as well now. And just nothing, it doesn't really make, from everything we're told, the issue between them was when it came to Ten Hag's sacking, that Ratcliffe wanted someone to say, these are the 5 best coaches you've never heard of for the job. And Ashworth was recommending safe pairs of hands and maybe saying, are you sure about Ruben Amorim? We haven't got the squad to fit him mid-season. And, let's be honest, he was kind of right.
But you're not surprised that more hasn't come out about that in the last few weeks? I have been surprised. I thought maybe something would have come out from Ashworth's side.
Yeah, I mean,
the 15th in the table, it's kind of easy to argue his side of things, isn't it?
I think there's probably a lot of I think there's probably a lot of non-disclosure agreements and things
true.
like that in there as part of the severance. And in a way, he doesn't need to talk about it because everyone can kind of see he was right. But the thing with
there's ways to speak out, isn't there, without actually giving a quote, is what I mean.
Yeah, there is, I guess. This is what kind of concerns me about it, because you speak to people who know Ashworth, but also just look. He's done plenty of interviews. Look at the interviews he's done. He is kind of one of those football executives who is a safe pair of hands. He's a good figurehead. He's very good at knitting departments together, at providing an overall direction, at knowing how to get a club all pointing in the same direction, which is kind of what United need. But I don't think anyone who's worked with him would say he's a brilliant visionary. His recruitment's decent, but I don't even think he's necessarily doing all of the recruitment. He has people.
But United should have known exactly who he was. It's called
this is the problem.
isn't it?
This suggests that they didn't know who he was, or Ratcliffe didn't know who he was. He just heard of him, basically. You're basically sacking him for doing something that he was never going to do, because it's
get Dan from the road at Newcastle.
Yeah, I've heard of Dan Ashworth. Let's have him. And I'm sure more has gone into it than that. But it kind of suggests that you're then like, well, he's not recommended Ruben Amorim, or he's not convinced about Ruben Amorim. But it's probably not. I don't think you have to know. I don't think you have to do an awful lot of research about Dan Ashworth to not be surprised about that. So it kind of makes you wonder what they want in the first place. And United at the time, if it's not working and there's friction there, it's right to part ways. But again, it's revealed today 4.1 million is the cost of hiring him and then sacking him, plus his wages. You're putting close to £5 million for absolutely nothing, essentially. I mean, you could have set fire to that £5 million in the centre circle and got the same return.
And the cost of these bad football decisions are made worse because of these cuts at the club. And look, Ratcliffe's all argued that it was a bloated organisation and they did employ the most staff in the Premier League. So clearly there did need to be redundancies and the workforce did need to be trimmed. Although having said that, it undermines what you're doing when you're making such obvious costly mistakes at that level. And these staff aren't exactly on 5 million, multi-million salaries per year. These are just normal working class people you'd think that are throughout the club in different jobs and different roles. I mean, the warning signs for me started when he asked staff to pay for their own trip to Wembley. Yeah. The £20 or £25 and bring your own packed lunches. That's unbelievable. You're Manchester United, aren't you? And it was the scaling back of academy coverage. There's been loads of little kind of bits and pieces behind the scenes that if you take it in isolation, it doesn't seem that bad, but it all adds up and it erodes at what the club's supposed to be.
Yeah, a lot of it feels very petty, like the cup final thing. The team reaches the cup final, it should be a reward for all of the staff. The point, good football clubs treat staff the same. I mean, they obviously don't treat all staff the same, but it should feel like everyone at that football club, everyone who works there has a role to play. We win the league, we reach the cup final. the person on the lowest salary has contributed to it the same as the person who's in the highest salary who scored the most goals. When you make decisions like that for the cup final, it just erodes that sense of morale. And this is something I asked Amorim about last week, the morale of the staff and how it's an issue for the first team. But it makes that disconnect that you basically, you take away those privileges and you don't feel a part of it anymore. And those staff don't feel a part of it anymore. You get a £100 bonus at the end of the year that becomes a £40 Marks and Spencer voucher, and your morale plummets. You don't feel a part of it anymore. And, it's impossible for us to really say, yeah, they had too many staff. There's people sat there doing nothing. It's impossible for us to say that. Only the club really know. Only Ratcliffe knows. The company, was it Interpath Advisory? I think he got into to look at it. They've obviously suggested that it's too big a workforce. And yes, they employ more people than any other club in the country. What I would say is that they also regularly insist they are the biggest club in the country. So I don't think it's a surprise that a football club that is the biggest in the country, that thinks it's the biggest in the country, that in reality probably should be the biggest in the country, employs more staff than anyone else. I don't think that's surprising. Obviously, they employ more staff than Nottingham Forest or other clubs. And I know the comparison was with City and other clubs like that, but United is still a bigger club than City. It's just the reality. There's more to do at United on a day-to-day basis than there is at City. There's probably more commercial partners there. So I don't think it's a surprise. I don't think it's as simple as saying they've got more staff than City. They've all got to go. They're
maybe you needed just to ask Fulham and say, right, Fulham, what's your number of staff? Yeah, let's just copy that, because we'll have the same ticket prices. We'll have the same staff. He loves Fulham, doesn't he?
I mean, this kind of sums up the PR mess as well, doesn't it? That who is telling him that's a good line to use in an interview with a fan?
Do you think he cares? I don't think he cares. Obviously, he spoke to Andy Mitten, the United Newsstand magazine, in December, or was it November?
Yeah, it was December.
Just around the time.
Well, it came out in December, yeah.
Yeah, and you're right, it was unbelievable, the quote that he produced. He just added more fuel to the fire, but I don't think he cares.
Does he care? Yeah, I mean, I don't know, to be honest. Everything around him suggests he cares, or the image he wants to portray suggests he cares, but I don't know. I think it's, a lot's made of this Mancunian upbringing, which is obviously true, but how much did he actually support United?
He had a season ticket at Chelsea, didn't he?
He had a season ticket at Chelsea.
Tried to buy Chelsea as well.
I wouldn't hold that against him as some fans would do, to be fair. I think when you're a businessman at that level and you live in London, that is the football club where you go to do business.
But it's going to be picked at, isn't it, at times like this?
It's going to be picked at.
I agree with what you're saying, but it will be picked at.
It's a bigger issue that he can barely name a game he's been to. And, when he did that little brief introductory thing in the press room at Old Trafford, I wasn't there that day, but I think it was Samuel who asked him about the last game he'd been to, and he couldn't mention it. And even this isn't for me, but I know a lot of fans mention it. The Cantona thing. Cantona's his favourite player. I don't think there's many 72-year-old United fans whose favourite player is Cantona. My wife's family are a family of United fans who are from Salford, and a few of them are in their 70s, and their favourite players are George Best or Bobby Charlton or Dennis Law. They all love Cantona, but
it's like
when they were 50 when Eric Cantona, 40 or 50.
If someone claims to like a band and you say, well, what's your favourite album? Like, well, the best hits. That's what it's like, isn't it? He's just kind of come up with an answer that needs to come up with.
It feels like, do you develop, you make great habit of, great capital on this podcast of poking fun at me for my age, but I know it's hard to believe to look at me, but I'm 41 and I'm a Shrewsbury fan. I'm not watching Shrewsbury now thinking he's my favourite player. My favourite players were from when I was 12, 15, 17, going every week. When you're influenced by those sort of things, I don't think there's many people who get a favourite player in their 40s necessarily, which is kind of what Ratcliffe is saying with Cantona. And look,
it's a good point, but you can't really,
you can't hold it against him.
Yeah, you can't turn around and question it, can you? If you're in a room and you're having a sit down as a journalist, you can't be like, hang on a minute, Jim.
Yeah,
but you're right. It does
this theory of he's evasive about his United background, about games he's been at, when he last came, how no one really knows how big a United supporter he is, because it feels like he's evasive about it. And like I said, the Cantona thing, I'm not saying it's an issue for me. I'm saying lots of fans have said it's a bit weird. Maybe it is a bit weird, but maybe that doesn't mean it's necessarily wrong. Like I say, Cantona was an enigmatic figure, but it all kind of adds up to this image of him that has gone from being a United fan and a saviour to a bit of a chancer, probably.
Do you know what is weird, Ty? It's not the clothes you wear. It's charging kids and pensioners £66 to watch Premier League games.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you even... There's no words, really. It is disgraceful. It's disgusting. Obviously, that was kind of... They made the mid-season decision to do that as well, which is even worse, really, without kind of consultation, push that through. There was huge backlash, big protests. They have kind of stood by it. Ratcliffe hasn't been pressured into making a U-turn. There was obviously that moment after Craven Cottage, wasn't it, when... so we say some unhappy fans approached him and used some interesting language to address Sir Jim Ratcliffe in that car. Did he say... Was he trying to have a photo, do you think, in that clip? Like, do you think they've asked him for a photo? Or do you think he arrogantly said, take your photo, take your photo? How do you think that went down?
I mean, it's impossible to say, but they were effing and jeffing at him, to use an old term, before he wound the window down. So I think he's probably seen, we're purely guessing here, but they were clearly being critical of him, those supporters, before he wound the window down. Then he wound the window down and sounded like he said something like, come on, lads, get your photo, with a smile, and then... quickly realised their intentions were a little more hostile, which is entirely understandable, because this again goes back to that upbringing. It's hard to believe how someone who has his backstory of being raised, if not in poverty, then at least a difficult upbringing
in Failsworth, a very normal working class area.
Yeah, and I'm not sure it was necessarily in poverty, but I think he would have seen people who were struggling. To then say, we're going to charge 66 quid and do away with pensioners and kids' tickets. And yes, it was only on those unsold tickets remaining this season. But again, I think the estimate was it might raise an extra 2 million. Like 2 million.
That's, but we're coming on the financial results in a second. But isn't it? It's pathetic. And you're right, it's nitpicking other things that, it's not worth it.
I can't believe it's worth the negative publicity to raise £2 million.
He's clearly taken the view that all these things add up, and it's true. I mean, rich people are billionaires because they're so strict and prudent with their money. But it's different when you run a football club. It's more than just a product. It's more than just a business, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I think this is something I was talking about with someone the other day, that you do kind of see, especially with the British businessmen that come into football and try and run it as a business. It doesn't tend to end well. I mean, you've made no secret of being from Newcastle, and you saw that with Mike Ashley at Newcastle. You're seeing it with Daniel Levy at Tottenham now. These people who have tried to run it as a business, and eventually supporters get fed up with it, because it's not really, it can't be treated as any other business. And maybe you're seeing a bit of that with Ratcliffe already, that he's so focused on the bottom line, and he's right that he's inherited a club that is in a real mess financially. But some of the things he's doing, it just doesn't feel like they're worth the long-term pain. Is it worth destroying staff morale and destroying that feeling of being all in it together to save on coach travel and a bit of a meal on the way to Wembley? I don't know what the cost is there. I find it hard to believe it's more than £1 million. It's surely peanuts. 2 million for £66 tickets, and the perception that you're pricing local people out of the game. Is it worth it in the long term? I find it hard to believe it is. And like I say, the redundancies, maybe you had to make them, but there's an awful lot of them now. And when you add it all together, destroying the morale of the people who work at that club, and it's destroying the sense that everyone's in it together. I just think some of that is mad, to be honest.
It is mad. And like you say, everyone you speak to, being at the club or have left the club, they all say morale is at rock bottom. Yeah. I mean, that's been kind of said, reiterated, hasn't it, over the last few months with all the changes that have gone on. Right. We've not really disagreed much.
No,
should we agree again that
say something and I'll disagree?
We said it in the opening section that we do agree, like the Old Trafford, addressing the future of Old Trafford's positive.
Yeah.
Obviously, they've had the task force. They held the final meeting in December. They're going to decide whether to revamp and rebuild. Potentially going to cost £2 billion if they are to rebuild. Is there really much more to say? It is a positive, isn't it? Clearly, because it needed to be done. It has fallen behind. And when you, for example, you were down at Tottenham at the weekend, other stadiums they've just gone clear, and United need something more befitting of the club.
Yeah, they need something that's more befitting of the club, and they need what a lot of stadiums are doing now, where it becomes a destination stadium. The Tottenham fans they're not there for the 2 hours of the game; they're there for 4 or 5 hours. and it's a real.
I find that weird though.
Venue.
Sorry,
I find that weird.
Yeah, having a pint at the stadium after the game. No, go into the pub and support your local pubs.
It wouldn't be for me, it's fair to say, and no, it wouldn't be for you, and it probably wouldn't be for a lot of United fans, but for some it would be. And you see it now. Like we turn up at Old Trafford 3 hours before kickoff, sometimes 3 hours 15 minutes before kickoff. There's probably a couple of thousand fans milling about. There's fans waiting for the players to arrive, and there's kind of nothing there for them to do apart from walk around the stadium, maybe go in the museum if they've booked, have a look in the shop. Beyond that, that's kind of it. There's no like, there isn't the same sense of like those bars or fan zones and stuff like that. And that's clearly an area that they could improve, and that a lot of modern stadiums do that Old Trafford just can't offer. So that is the fact that they've even tried to make some progress on there. I think it's the one big plus for them in their first year. The real test is going to be, and this is kind of what I've written for the morning, that I don't think there's any getting away from the fact that it's been a disastrous first year. It's the next 12 months now that are vital, and maybe that's obvious, but by next February, we should know what's happening with Old Trafford. There should be a financing plan for it if it's going to happen. They clearly want / maybe even need government support, and then on the pitch, things should be looking a lot better in the year. Amorim should clearly be the man. They should be challenging for top 4, maybe, and feels ambitious, top 6 at least. There should be a style of play that is enjoyable to watch again. So it feels like the next 12 months are massive, mainly because of, well, for those two reasons, the Old Trafford and the quality of the football. But you're right that the facilities, doing something about Carrington, trying to do something about Old Trafford, at least shows an ability to get their hands dirty and to really focus on what, the issues that do need fixing.
And the Old Trafford roof did need fixing, to be fair. So hopefully
has done for a long time.
It will not leak if a new stadium is built. We'll leave it there for part 1. We'll be back in a moment for part 2. Welcome back to part 2 of the podcast. Now, we like to be a bit more conversational on this podcast, don't we, Ty? That's the kind of aim. So we're going to get into the financial results. I'm sure listeners absolutely love hearing about that. It's probably the worst part of the job, I think, actually. We're kind of giving insight into the job in the first episode. But I think running over figures that are released on a day like this, it's gloomy outside, I'm mildly hungover to celebrate my birthday. I didn't need to be going through the results. The only saving grace was we were supposed to be in the office today. We were going to record this podcast in person, weren't we? But there's currently work going on again for the podcast studio, so we're doing it from home. We'll just get into it then. We'll briefly talked about the cost of sacking Erik ten Hag and Dan Ashworth. That's around £40 million. That cost to get rid of them. Obviously, Erik ten Hag's staff as well, and Ashworth. We've talked about the running of the club and redundancies, etc. It's just, when you see those figures, you think it didn't have to happen, did it? If they didn't extend his contract in the summer, which was such a bad decision, they would have saved more money and it would have cost less to sack Erik ten Hag.
Yeah, it would clearly still have cost something, but there would have been a year less on his contract. I don't think anything's ever been said about exactly what happened to his salary, whether it stayed the same or went up, but either way, it would clearly have been less because he had a year left. The same with his staff. I mean, 2 of the staff that were paid off, in fact, all of them, Hacker, 3 of them, sorry, Hacker, Ten Roofalar and Van Nistelrooy had only arrived in the summer. And the Ashworth Farrago we've kind of touched on already. So yeah, it didn't need to happen. I mean, that was always kind of felt like the big takeaway from the accounts. The way United do it, and I think this is partly through being on the New York Stock Exchange, to be honest, is that they do their results quarterly. So a lot of clubs will only release financial results at the end of the year. United, you're getting updates every 3 months. So this only covered October, November, December, which was obviously when the changes happened with Ten Hag, the changes happened with his staff, with Ashworth. Also worth remembering that it cost him 11 million to hire Amorim and his staff. I don't know, to be honest, if that would have been any cheaper in the summer or not, but that was always going to be kind of the highlight of this 3 monthly figures, that it was going to give us the fees. And that's £70 million in sacking managers now since Fergie left, which again is just, when you look at the debt this club's in, and the United Supporters Trust spotted Interest payments, I think, total 18 million as well, which means it's now over £1 billion in interest payments since the Glazers took over. You look at the £1 billion spent, mostly wasted on players, 70 million on sacking managers. The reason this club is a complete mess financially isn't because they employed too many office staff, or because staff have been having free trips to Wembley, or because they're getting £100 cash every Christmas as a reward. It's on the Glazers. It's on the money wasted on transfers. It's on decisions like backing Ten Hag, giving him 200 million and then changing your mind. That's why this club's in a mess. Those sort of decisions. But it's the employees and it's the supporters who are being made to pay for it, isn't it?
It's bad decision after bad decision. I messaged you earlier referencing the famous Mick McCarthy clip where he's asked in the press conference and it goes, well, it can't get much worse, can it, Mick? Well, it can.
It can.
And if United don't qualify for European football, which at the moment, via their league position, it seems unlikely, they can obviously get into the Europa League again by winning the Europa League, which hopefully they do. But if they're not playing in Europe next year, Ty, it's going to have huge implications because the broadcasting revenue is already down 42% to 61 million. Yeah, and that is just going to be slashed even more if there's no European football at all. It's so imperative that they win the Europa League. It has to be the target now.
Yeah, 100% it has to be the target. It's massive, really. I mean, to think that, I think it went from like 82 million to 44 million or something, the broadcast revenue for those 3 months. I'm purely guessing here, but without any European football, it probably goes from something like 82 million to 30 million. And you extrapolate that over at least another 6 months of when you're actually in Europe, and it's massive. And you take away the Champions League prize money. I mean, we've talked about the financial situation, but it feels like they're so desperate for Champions League football, and the finances on offer. We see it every year in the accounts, and it feels like they had a run of Champions League, Europa League, Champions League, Europa League, Champions League. Well,
the only manager to record successive top 4 finishes since Fergie left. Solskjaer, of course, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's a debate for a different time. And I think that one might actually be a debate. So I'm not, we'll get into that on a different occasion. But, every year we see it and we say, this is the cost of missing out on the Champions League. And it's always, even in Europa League, it's £100 million plus. It's the haves and the have-nots. It's absolutely transformational to a club getting into the Champions League, especially now. I mean, if United don't win the FA Cup and don't get in the Europa League, they're missing out on those revenues. There's 2 extra games a season now. Even on it's 4 extra home matches, of which I think the estimate is they make about £3 million a game at home. So that's £12 million in match day revenue that would go. I mean, it is huge.
It's huge, isn't it? Yeah,
for a club that is losing too much money.
And we've spoken about obviously the interest in the January window in Alejandro Garnacho from Napoli and Kobbie Mainoo's talks still over a new deal. And United haven't yet, we talked about this the other episode, and we haven't yet been forced to sell anyone, obviously to work within PSR rules. But it feels like that moment might be coming very soon, especially if they don't qualify for Europe.
Yeah, it does. And, I think there was a line in today's accounts again that they remain just about compliant with PSR and very aware of how tight they are. I mean, it's a confusing set of rules. I thought they'd find it easier, to be honest, because it's a 3-year monitoring period. And 4 years ago now, they lost 150 million, I think, the COVID season when they were more affected than most clubs. That dropped off and you thought it would ease, but I think they've lost so much over the last 2 years as well. And looks like they're going to lose money again, that it's still problematic. And you're right, there's the PSR issues, the fact they've got to raise money to spend. There's got to be a really good chance they do have to sell someone this year, especially if they don't get in Europe. I think that's a real possibility. And it comes back to this. I've raised it a few times that I don't think Amorim was a bad appointment. I don't think he necessarily will be a bad appointment. But you've got to question the wisdom of appointing a manager who plays such a unique system when you don't have the players for it. And now you're basically telling him we don't have any money either.
Or you just go back to last summer and just think, well, just make the decision to get rid of Ten Hag there and then. Yeah. And then you wouldn't have backed him in that window and wasted that money on players who were signed for him. I mean, it just goes back to that for me. I know I say let's not harp on about it, But the more I thought
It's
about
right.
it, every decision you talk about this season, and we're talking about Amorim and his system and the scrutiny he's facing, but it just keeps going back to the summer, doesn't it? They messed it up so bad.
Yeah, they did mess it up so bad, and they've, Amorim's got he's got at least one hand tied behind his back now, and part of you does wonder whether he will reach a point where he just says, "Do you know what? This ain't for fixing."
Do you know what? I feel sorry for him at the moment. You look at him, he arrived in Manchester, a bit of a tan, didn't he? And he would have had a brilliant life in Lisbon in Portugal. The sun was shining. His team were top of the league. He just beat Manchester City in the Champions League. And he does look a bit, I don't know what the word is, maybe disheveled, probably a bit harsh, because it is an incredibly stressful, it's an incredibly stressful job. But it's amazing, isn't it, how managers come in, and it was always the cliche of Mourinho, wasn't it? When he comes in, he looks so fresh. But it really does take the toll on Premier League managers.
It definitely ages them, and especially at this club. And he, like I say, he must be going through utter hell at the moment. He must be aware of, and it's easy to say there's kind of the idea that there's no pressure on him, which I don't think there really is any pressure on him. But I wrote a piece on Monday. This isn't happening in a vortex this season. I don't think there's any danger he gets sacked this season, but it is affecting what happens next season. The faith and belief in him could slowly ebb away with these results, and not to the point where it vanishes, but to the point where if you start next season poorly, the mindset goes from he's not to blame for any of this to was he to blame for some of that then? And the questions start earlier than they would have done if this wasn't happening and he wasn't here now and he wanted the job in the summer. So he does look older. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And he, poor fella.
Well, he joked, didn't he? He celebrated his 40th birthday.
And celebrated
and he said, "I feel 50." Yeah, you are 50. Yeah.
Hey.
Must have called for a ticket price freeze. Ty, we've just kind of mentioned they highlighted the debt. It's over 1 billion, and they wrote a letter to Sir Jim Ratcliffe last month calling for a freeze. Fair play to them, because they're kind of leading on this issue and they're giving fans a voice, aren't they? And it's really important that you have that kind of official representation, because it's all well and good protesting and talking about it on social media, but you need a supporters club to actually get it down in writing and talk to the club and open lines of communication. So they do a lot of good work.
Yeah, they really do. And it's becoming a real hot issue because I think there's a feeling within the game, and certainly with all the American owners now, that teams want to do away with season tickets. It's a huge issue at Manchester City that less and less season tickets are being issued. Hardly any new season tickets are being issued. And I think there's a feeling that clubs would happily do away with season tickets, and every ticket would be on general sale, essentially, for every game. And you'd get more destination tourists in who would spend more about the place. And I think it's going to be a major hot button issue for the next couple of years, how that plays out. And you're right, Mostar leading on it. I felt, and I think a lot of people felt, the letter that United sent without any names on it. I thought it was telling as well that no one from United put the name to the letter they sent to the 1958 a couple of weeks ago. To me, reading between the lines of that letter, it signalled price increases are coming. I know City fans they've written a very strong letter as well to their club. Their season tickets went up 5% last year. It's going to be a big issue, I think, for both Manchester clubs. And I think there's 3 Premier League clubs that have already said we're going to freeze prices next season. And
I think Liverpool just announced it, didn't they?
The third was Liverpool, which did it last week, maybe, or the start of this week. And it feels like that is going to put a lot of pressure on United and City, because it's easy for, I'm not sure who the other two are. I want to say Brentford. I might be wrong. I don't know. But it's 2 smaller Premier League clubs.
I think West Ham have got one of the lowest price season tickets in the league, so they might be up there anyways.
Rightly so, given you can barely see any football from the seats in that stadium. But yeah, it's easy to kind of ignore it when Brentford are doing it. When Liverpool do it, and if then United and City come out and say our tickets are going up 5%, it kind of puts the pressure on them. And Liverpool have done the right thing. And whether they're doing the right thing this season to do really the wrong thing in a year's time, who knows? Like I say, I think this is going to become more and more of a talking point around tickets and season tickets. But I fear prices are going to go up. I'd certainly reading between the lines of that letter, I got the impression prices were going to go up. They really should freeze them. You can't make any fair case for tickets at United going up if they're finishing 13th, 14th, 15th in the Premier League. It is not.
You just know they're waiting for a good result. And when they get a good result,
Yeah.
which doesn't seem likely at the moment. They
No.
will send that renewal email and they'll announce
Yeah.
ticket increase, won't they, for season tickets? It just seems inevitable the way the club's run at the moment.
Totally unjustifiable. And I guess the other thing of interest is going to be the whole, not just the £66 thing, but the no concessions. I mean, I would be surprised if that became a policy for next season. I think that was probably just for those unsold tickets, but I think there's a lot of talking points around.
Well, there's
tickets.
a disagreement. I think they'll keep it. I'd be surprised if it changed. I don't think they're going to back down. There's nothing about Ratcliffe that he doesn't seem to kind of bow down to pressure. I've not seen it at the moment. I'll be surprised if it happens.
Yeah, maybe we'll see. But yeah, I think
40 minutes in, we finally had a disagreement.
We finally disagreed on something. But yeah, you're right. Must have done some really good work over tickets, and they're right. Like I say, United cannot present a fair case as to why ticket prices should go up. They just can't. And if they do go up, I'm sure they will try. No one will buy that spin because there is no justification for raising ticket prices at Old Trafford next season. None at all.
We'll just end with a mention. I forgot to mention this in the first part, actually, when we're talking about the hierarchy of the club and how it's changed and the football decisions that they've made. That United is still deciding basically whether to replace Dan Ashworth as sporting director, because Barada and Wilcox have absorbed his responsibilities essentially in the last 3 months or so, and they're kind of still weighing up whether to bring someone new in. I don't think, knowing how that Ashworth spell worked out, maybe there isn't room for a sporting director. Would you agree with that? They are two big figures, and clearly their roles and responsibilities go beyond what you'd maybe ordinarily expect a CEO and a technical director to do.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's probably something we didn't really mention in the first part, that perhaps there was never a need for an Ashworth in the first place. And not just because of Jason Wilcox's role, but because in appointing Barada as chief executive, it's a clear step change from Richard Arnold and Ed Woodward. Those were two commercial/business facing CEOs. With Barada, you've gone to a football facing CEO. He's worked in football for years. He knows the game, so to speak. He's a hands-on football leading chief exec, when Woodward and Arnold, certainly Arnold wasn't, when Woodward shouldn't have been. So there's perhaps no need for another sporting director. There might be an appointment lower down the chain, maybe, if this kind of changes some of what Wilcox does. It looks like Christopher Vell is staying as recruitment director. And like I said, this all kind of feeds into the review heading towards the redundancies. And I think with the redundancies last year, I think the football department was pretty much untouched, if not entirely untouched, whereas I don't think that's going to be the case this year. I think there's going to be redundancies there. I think a lot of clubs have been laying off scouts. Scouting is clearly, it's an interesting subject, but scouting is clearly moving from a human industry with people going to games to a data-led industry. But
then having said that, Ratcliffe has said he's criticised the data department, hasn't he? He said that in an interview. So,
well, he has, yeah. I guess that's easy to improve, or should be easy to improve. Invest in better data suppliers, get better people at reading the data. Feels to me like it should be fairly easy to improve that. But you're right. He did say that the data department, did he say the data was last century or something?
Yeah.
But you look at the clubs who are doing well. I mean, Liverpool's data department there's been books written about it. It's phenomenal by all accounts. And you read anything about the appointment of Slot, and that was all data driven. And look how it's worked for them. You look at Brentford and Brighton; those are two clubs run by data geeks essentially, and they make very clever decisions using that data. So I think it's clearly becoming a big thing. And I think there's, I think, like I say, other clubs have laid off scouts. I wouldn't be surprised if United did it, because that is an industry that is moving from sending all these scouts to games to go combing the data and then maybe sending a handful of scouts to games. So I think that is probably one of those industries that's going to be hit. So it wouldn't surprise me if more of these redundancies now came in the football department, which is why I think the sporting director decision is kind of being packaged into this review of the football department. And right, who's going, who's getting made redundant, or what jobs are going in this department, and if they're going, do we need a new sporting director, or do we not, or do we need an appointment elsewhere in the food chain, so to speak?
think it was Athletic Bilbao's sporting director who was linked to the job the other week. I laughed. Isn't that not the easiest job in world football, considering the only that's in the Basque region? I don't think that's going to work in Manchester.
Yeah, they've not got worldwide scouts, I don't think, have they?
No, I don't think so. Again, not many disagreements on this podcast there. I'll have to do better next week, but thanks for time as usual.
Disagree on. No problem. Thank you, Stephen.
Maybe the colour of the merch. That could be a hot topic. Anyways, thanks to listeners as usual. If you're watching on YouTube, give her a like and give her a comment and leave a review if you're listening on Spotify, etc. Have a great week and take care.